Graham Dretch was kind enough to send me this Stamford Dragon model. It's come from the Stamford repository where scanned objects, and it's going to be the subject of this render and this lighting tutorial that I'm going to do. As you can see, I've just made it red. That's it. It's just red. There's no other material properties. It's just red. In fact, I'll just show you that. There you go, a red dragon. And I'm going to wrap a box around it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use additional primitives provided by Rashad Carter. I'm going to use a box. Now, you may wonder why I'm not using a Bryce cube. That is because there's a slight problem with using Bryce primitives and true ambient rendering, which we hopefully will get around to. Not the problem, the rendering. And so it's better to use these primitives, and the really useful facility provided by Rashad there, and I find myself using them a lot, so I'm glad it's done that for us. The attributes of this box is going to be positive. I'm going to copy and paste that box and just make it a little bit smaller, stretch it out the front, and make the attributes of that negative. Select both boxes together, group them. That will provide me with a Boolean operation that will cut a hole in the front of that box and allow me to see my subject, hopefully. The material of this box, I'll just set it to default grey and then make the whole thing white. So it's a red dragon in a white box, and that's what the render looks like now. And as you can see, I can't see the dragon. The whole subject of my scene, and I can't see the dragon. So how can I solve this little conundrum? Well, I could move the sun around, but that's going to defeat the object of the tutorial. I want the sun in this position, but I want the dragon to show up. Well, if I go into the Skylab, I've got the option of I'll just introduce render in scene here so you can see what's happening. In reducing the intensity of the shadows, so I could make them none but get no shadows at all except what's applied to the objects themselves, their self-shadowing capability. If I drop the intensity down to, I don't know, about half, you can see, we can see the dragon, but it just looks like the back of the cube's glowing, and there are no shadows here underneath the dragon where you'd expect them, so it's just not very realistic. So I'll turn the intensity back up to 100. Another option might be to use the gamma correction, because that's meant to reduce the contrast in the scene and lighten it. And now we can see, but what we can see is it's the haze effect in the scene that's just lighting the back of the box. So once again, it just looks like it's glowing. No realistic shadows here, so that's not very good either. So I'm going to get rid of gamma correction and think, well, what else could I do? I'm going to use high dynamic range image made by Horo to light the scene. That should be more realistic, shouldn't it? And it'll improve the lighting. Well, it will, but I've got to use it right. So the image I'm going to use, I go to Bryce Tutorials, Bryce Downloads. I'm going to use an image from his HDRI Pack 1. So I can find that here, and that looks like that. And it's this image here, which is a woodland scene, some trees in it, the sun peeping out from behind the trees, nice blue sky. So that's going to light my scene. To get the HDRI image in, then go to the image based lighting tab in the Skylab, use HDRI image, open, navigate to where the image is. Here it is. And because I'm only using it as a light source, not as a backdrop, I'm going to choose the lowest resolution. So that's the diameter of the light probe. With each of these light probes, there's also a text file that tells you how to well, actually I'll see if I can find it. That's probably the best way. I've got the text file here. Right, so here's some information about the HDRI images and how they were made, and things about setting up the effect and where the sun is. So that's its azimuth, so it's north, and that's its elevation, which is altitude, so it's at 43 degrees. So that's, I'll be using that information, so it's worth knowing these things. And we've also got a little QuickTime thing here in the folder. So if I open with QuickTime Player, get that right, then you can actually have a look at a round of tone mapped version of the scene, if I can just get that to work. So this is what we've got as our backdrop. It's rather a nice feature. Right, back to where we were. Okay, so only as a light source, I'm not worried about intensity. Quality setting is how many simulated light sources are generated in the sky. A drawback with having the Bryce sun is it's only one light source. Now we can control the number of light sources. There'll be a brighter light source where the sun is in the sky, but there will all be other light sources where the blue is. We turn the quality setting down, the render speed will be higher, but less light sources means shadows. And obviously the more light sources you've got, the finer the shadow detail. Well, I can show you that. I'm going to turn the effect up until we can see something in the scene. Here's our preview. A little bit more. There we go. So really we're only concerning ourselves with the saturation, which is the colours from the sky, and the effect, and these little controls here we'll come to in a minute. We're not interested in it as a backdrop, so we can turn it off or leave it on. It doesn't matter, because it's only what's going on inside the box that counts. I'm going to leave it on now so we can have a look at the sky. Well, as I said, I wanted particularly the sun from this direction, so it's lighting there, this corner of the box in the scene. At the moment the sun's behind, it's due north, so we can take the azimuth and pop it into the yaw value there, enter that, and it'll rotate it so that the sunlight here is at the same azimuth as it was with the Bryce sun. The altitude at 33.9 is not that different from what it was previously, so I'm not going to worry about that. It's close enough for what I want to do. And now you can see we've got a lot of bright light entering the box on this corner, and we can see a little bit of the detail in the background, so we'll have a look how that looks in the render. Okay, so this is good. We're getting a bit more here, and it's coming from the other light sources in the sky. The bands in this shadow, its distinct shadow regions, is because we've only got 16 light sources. We can't see that much at the back, and the top here is very dark because that can't see any of the simulated light sources in the sky. We could try using gamma correction again to brighten things up, and that's sort of helped, but it's again, it's not ideal. It's still not got any light here, so we could try experimenting by increasing the quality. So I'll take it back up to its default setting when it loads, and that'll allow you to see that having more light sources now reduces the effect of the banding. You can still see the sun banding, but the lighting's nice. The render is a bit slower. You're looking at about a minute for this, and so increasing the effect to maximum hopefully will reduce the effect of the banding altogether. And it's increased the render time to about 10 minutes, so that's quite slow now. The quality of the lighting is very nice, and this blue is what's arriving from the sky, possibly a bit strong, so I'll adjust this saturation setting for reduce the saturation of the light from the sky. Then it looks a bit more realistic, so that's okay. That's considerably better than where I was before, but still I'd like to see if the sunlight was this bright falling on this box and everything else that was so brightly lit, you'd expect there to be some light up here, not in total darkness. And so this is a limitation of high dynamic range image as a direct light source, is only where the box can see the sky then will it get any light. Well, this back edge of the box should be able to see some sky. Well, what I'll do to show you that is record the present camera position and take my camera and stick it in the box, turn it round so it's looking out the box, and have a look over the head of the dragon here to see what we can see from the back of the box. Not that much of the sky, and it's mostly trees there. Right, so maybe that explains why it's not getting lit. Perhaps if I was to find a way of reducing the intensity of the sunlight falling here, I could continue to increase the HDRI so it lights the back. Well, I could do that just as a photographer would do by controlling the light in the environment and introducing things to block the sun off. So if I want to block the sun off to this corner, what I need to do is I'll swing the camera around here. Right, now that's the sun, but that's the Bryce sun. If we go into the Skylab and turn the sun visible as a visible object off, it's not producing any light, but it's still visible on the backdrop there. We'll now see that's the sun that's providing all the intense white light in the scene. We could cover that up with something, and that would reduce the intensity of the light falling in through the box, which would then allow us to increase the light for the back without it burning out this front part of the image. So for this operation I'm going to reduce the quality, and that will allow things to render a bit more quickly. So that's that. If I want to know where to put the thing that's going to block off the light, I need to move my camera to where the light's falling. That's easy enough. I put my camera in there and then swing it up so I can see where the sun is. Then I'll create a sphere and enlarge that sphere, drag it into the scene. It's a bit big still, so I'll just move it out a bit. There we go. And pop it over where the sun is in the sky. So if I need to make any adjustments to this position, I'll just record this camera position and switch back to the other one. And now, oh, I seem to have missed somehow. I'll go back to my other view. Right, there's the sun. It should be, I'll enlarge it. Right, switch back again. That's it. Right, I've got it positioned now so it's blocking off the main light from the sun, but it's allowing other lights in the sky to light the inside of the box. At this point now I can experiment with turning the HDRI effect up so that more light's arriving from the other areas in the sky. So you can see that's working after a fashion, but still not getting a lot at the back there. It's still quite dark. I've got the gamma correction on, so I'm really making the most of what's there. I've got the maximum HDRI effect, so if I need more light, in here I've got a control that says apply to light source. If I check that, I can now increase the intensity of the backdrop, really increase it, so I've got masses of light now. So this is acting as a multiplier for the effect, and if we render that, you can see that essentially no matter how much light I provide from the backdrop, I can't light this area. Because this box is sort of on the infinite plane, and the infinite plane will be blocking any light that could arrive from simulated light sources, let's say from the ground, I could try getting rid of the infinite plane. So I'll get rid of that because I'm only really interested in what's going on inside the box. And now at last we've got some light going up here, quite a bit now. So this is the ground is also acting as light sources. So we could see how this is going to look once we get round to reducing the intensity of the light now. So I'll set that back down at 5, and in fact I'll disable the apply to light source, and so it doesn't seem now there's going to be a problem getting enough light. And now I've got rid of the ground, we're getting some light that's coming off the ground. So this is better, but obviously I've lost the characteristic of the light falling across this corner, which was, as I stated, one of the aims of my render. So I'm going to modify this sphere, the material of this sphere, set it to blend transparency, and let 50% of the sunlight through, and that should restore my intense light at this point, which is probably looking a little bit too intense. So I'll reduce the effect so that I'm getting some intense light there, but it's not completely burning out that area. I've still got some lighting at the back, and you can see the bands from the simulated light sources now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera in, so I'm just featuring the inside of the box. I'm not interested in what's going on outside, it's just a still life project, and I'm going to see how it looks for render time at maximum quality. So this will be the most I can do to reduce the shadow bands in the image. We'll see what that looks like. So a bit of brown from the light coming from the ground, and we've got our intense light here from the sun. It's going to take about 15 minutes to render. We've got fairly high contrast shadows, and we've got the red dragon in the white box. And the point I would raise is that because the materials I've yet chosen are so uniform, there's no bump map on them, there's no pattern on them, even at the maximum setting, quality setting for a high dynamic range image that's alighting with direct light, you'll still see shadow bands. And what's missing here from this is that if this was really as red as that and the box as white as that, you would expect the red to be influencing the white in some way. You wouldn't have such a intensely coloured object against another white surface without some of the red appearing to affect the surface. So it's not as good as it could be, and it's at this stage where, still using the HDRI backdrop, we can switch to the true ambience render mode and see if we can get some of the effects I've been talking about. Before I do that, I go into the image-based lighting tab. I'm going to reduce the quality again, because it doesn't use simulated light sources. It's not direct lighting, it's indirect light. To set this up, I want to make sure that I've got nothing else influencing the scene, so I want to get it fully black, so I'll turn the HDRI effect off to nothing. In here, what we need checking is true ambience optimization. This means that no direct light will be provided from the background, no simulated light sources. It's just going to look at the background as a light source, but it's going to do it by investigating its environment, which is the way this render method works. I'm also going to turn it off as a backdrop. So now if I render without any light source, we can't see anything at all. And now I'm going to turn gamma correction off and go to render options, premium effects, true ambience, turn the raise per pixel down to the lowest setting so it speeds things up, scattering correction for the best quality, and for the effect, and then we render. And you can see, I hope you can see, there's some blue spots in there. So where are these blue spots coming from? I'll just record this camera position and then widen the field of view. They're coming from the blue environment, and that's because we've still got the sky mode set for a soft sky. So I'll turn the atmosphere off and set the sky fully black, and now there should be no light in this scene. I'll restore the camera position so we're looking in the box. No light at all. Now if we go to the HDRI tab and we give some HDRI effect, and you can see there's a bit something going off in here, and that's because the preview only renders in the direct light, even though this is an indirect light render. And you only get the indirect light render in the main view and not in the nano preview unless you select accurate rendering. But if you do that, then it'll tend to slow down every time it updates the nano, so I tend to leave that switched off. Now we can see we're getting some light inside the box, and this is just coming from the eye dynamic range image backdrop. In the overhead view, I'm just going to get rid of this sphere, so we've only got the HDRI image providing the light, and even though the sun's there, you can see there's no intense white on this edge. And this is because the method used is if we look at this spot on this surface, what it'll do is it'll look out in a random direction and it might see the back of this box, which might then look out in a random direction and it might see the side of this box, and then it looks out in a random direction and sees this red dragon, and then that looks out in direction and sees the HDRI backdrop. Then the backdrop light comes to the dragon, which gets tinted red, that goes onto this wall, which gets tinted red, which goes onto this wall, that gets tinted red, which goes onto here, which then says, it's red, 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 red from the outside light. But each of these walls, colours being grey, will influence the final arrived light colour. And this happens all over the surface, which is why it's quite noisy, because it's got to do lots of investigation and it's all pinging off in different directions. So that's the light gathering method, and to defeat the noise you need to turn up the raise per pixel, but when you do that, this slows the render down. Now you can see now we're getting very good modelling of the inside of this box though, and you can see a lot of red influence from the dragon, but it's quite dim still. There are ways of increasing the brightness. We could choose boost light, which seems to be very good at retaining the colour settings, but it also is very good at introducing noise. Even at the highest setting, it introduces these bright spots, because these are the spots that have bounced off and found the sun, which in a HDRI backdrop, high dynamic range, the sun's incredibly bright compared with everything else. So that's not a great option for that. I mean, it's a great option for some things, but in this case it's not going to help me. So I'll turn off boost light again, but I thought I would mention it. I'm going to lower the raise per pixel so we can preview this. I'll set them about 36. It shouldn't be too bad render time then. Let's see. Okay, we go back to the image-based lighting tab and we can increase the lighting effect. Now although you can see in the preview here we've got this strong sunlight, we're not getting it in this scene because it's diffused due to the way that the light's gathered. So if we want that strong sunlight, which I did state that was going to be a sort of key feature of the lighting in this scene, I'm going to go back into the Skylab and re-enable the sun. So now I've got the sun providing direct light, and that direct light's hitting this white inside of the box, and because this surface is now so bright, these other parts are seeing this bright light, and that's now become a light source within this scene. So it's directly lit, and it's also an ambient light source. So now we're starting to see something that looks quite realistically lit. So we've combined the HDRI backdrop as a true ambience optimized light source, and we've got the direct lighting here providing our impression of the sunlight, and it's all looking pretty good. So final adjustments then. I'm gonna shrink the dragon now because it appears to be, if I can get hold of him, he's in here somewhere, interfering with the side of the box slightly. I noticed his tail was stuck in the box. I'll just shrink that down, bring him, and he's also slightly embedded in the floor. So just some final adjustments then. And the thing is that for the highest quality render options, then it's going to need premium effect and very high raise per pixel. With a still life, because we're looking at something that's apparently quite small, it would appear appropriate to use depth of field, but there's actually not a lot of things to be out of focus here, so that might be redundant. And also this shadow edge might be a bit sharp for something on such a small scale, so you could introduce soft shadows as well. But since we're focusing only on lighting, as other considerations, we'll just use true ambience, high raise per pixel, and we'll see how long that render's going to take. So we can see by the progress of the line down the scene that it's going to take a while. We've got nice shadow modelling here, and the effect of the red coloured dragon inside the box is obviously influencing the white of the box, and it reckons it's going to take 55 minutes to render. So it's quite a long render time, so I'll let that render out. I'll pause the video now so you don't have to sit here watching that. As is often the case when I've had a chance to sit back and look at it rendering a bit, I've come to the conclusion the back of this box is a bit bright, and I imagine that this strange imaging here is occurring because of using these objects, because the type of normals that you have on the objects tends to affect the transience effect, and that's just something to be aware of. So that the more complex the model is, the better the effect's going to be. I'm going to look at I'm just going to look at my render options, make sure I've got nothing else set that might be upsetting the system, so it all looks good. And then I'm going to go into the IBL tab, because I was thinking it looked a bit bright at the back, and I'm going to reduce the intensity at the back by reducing the influence of the image-based lighting backdrop. So it's still lighting the scene, but now a lot more influence is going to be coming from the fact that we've got this very intense white area here that's being lit directly from the sun. So we've got the subtle lighting from the image-based lighting that's been optimized for true ambience, and then also the effect of this that's being lit directly and then indirectly lighting the interior of the box as well as the dragon, which you can see is still providing quite a lot of red in there. But I just thought having that contrast would really make the scene, so I'll leave that to render again. Well, I've been watching this render and I can sort of see the direction it's going in, and it looks okay, but I'm just not entirely happy with the results. So there is one more thing we could try here. So I'll just stop that render and reduce the raise per pixel down so I can get things set up. Right, let's turn the sun back off. We've got the quality set at 16. We could turn the true ambience optimization off, so we're actually providing direct light from the backdrop. And what we'll do is we'll increase the shadow softness, so it'll hide the bands from the reduced number of light sources. And even though we're providing direct light, we'll still use true ambience. So now we've got a combination of effects being used. So you can see we've got a bit of noise in here, and it's not quite bright enough. Remember, no longer using the Bryce sun, this is using the high dynamic range sun that's in this scene. So I'll set this up, and you can see at what point it gets fully white here in the preview. The soft shadows are slowing down the preview, but we can't see any soft shadows yet in here because I've not turned the effect on in the premium effects. So if we go into the render options, we can turn soft shadows on now, and that will soften those shadows and that'll hide the banding. But we've also now got direct lighting and indirect lighting combined in the background here. So I'm going to continue turning this up. You'll notice that the quality of the colour has changed as a result of taking this approach, and this is because the sampling of the background has been reduced, and it's mostly from the direct lighting provided with the HDRI that it's then getting its samples. Once it hits a surface, then it's reproducing the effect. So this is another alternative. As before, I'll turn gamma correction on to reduce the contrast, because obviously the high dynamic range is giving us a bit too much contrast. We've got totally burned out on this corner here, and we're getting some light that's the reflected light from this floor, well, scattered light rather than reflected. If it was reflection, you'd expect to see images, but this is scattered. These are diffuse surfaces. And this is another approach that we could take that seems to produce quite good results. I'll go back in here. If I add the backdrop to the sky, which was fully black, we'll also have this as something that the true ambience can gather light from. So it's not just a fully black background, now it's getting it also from the environment. I can show you that by, remember this camera position, turn this round, we've now got the backdrop in. So the true ambience effect can see the backdrop, but it's also getting direct lighting from it. So this is a combination of effects to try and produce the best results. The drawback of this is going to be a long render time, and it's a bit difficult to judge at this stage whether it's going to be a successful render because the image is so noisy. So the thing to do now is to turn the render options up and see what horrendous render time this is going to give us for this approach. So I've start rendering. Ooh, look, that's going to be slow. That's really slow. That's going to be hours and hours slow. So right, we'll reduce it. If that'll half the time, that'll quarter the time. So we'll see what a quarter of the time's going to be. Obviously, though, there's going to be issues with the noise, so I have to judge whether or not it's going to be worth spending the time using this approach. But in some cases I think this is the best of both worlds, but the worst of all rendering worlds in terms of render time. So that's 1 hour 22, but the results are looking promising. So the only snag is, of course, that if I render a little bit, you can see it's still going to be tremendously noisy even at 64 rays per pixel. So I've got the option off, render at this, but at and put it with a long render time or reduce the size of the image. But I'll render at this and see how it turns out. So I imagine this is going to be, let's see, so if it was a quarter, that's at least 5 hours, 5.5 hours render time to do this. I mean, you can see by the slow progress down the screen, this is a fairly fast computer. This is processors an i7 920, so, and it's got multiple cores to take advantage of. We're not using all of the cores at the moment because obviously I'm doing other things on the computer, so I could possibly dedicate a few more cores to the render process. The priority is set to high. I just control its usage through the task manager. I find that's the easiest way because then I can set its priority dynamically, whereas otherwise I'm reliant on Bryce, and every time you change the priority it'll want to restart the render. As you can see, it's just waiting for it to get to the bottom here so we can have a report on the render time and what that's going to be. So we'll see what it says. It's nearly 6 hours. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video at this point, obviously, and we'll see how that looks. This then is the completed render of our approach so far. It took a long time. It's pretty good. It's got good shadows. I'm not very happy with this degree of noise in the background. There's a bit something iffy going in here with the normals in the way that this cube's constructed, purely because there's no reflection on the cube. It's just the trio render method is not working well with its geometry. So that's the end of part 1. In part 2 we're going to look at trying to achieve a similar quality effect but at a reduced render time, and we'll see if we can address some of the issues like this noise and this geometry that have come to light in setting this up.